And this is the Global Digest think tank. You are our guest today. I'm not
Yes.
sure yourself is American or yourself is Canadian, and
Canadian,
how can
Canadian, but my
how can
specialty is in America, even though I am Canadian.
I see?
I never served in the United States, but as I said, my scholarly expertise is in studying America.
I see.
But I
So
served in Canada.
and what interesting is you said about hybrid warfare.
Indeed,
So
hybrid warfare. So usually, when we talk about hybrid warfare, we're usually talking about Russia today, but there is a big debate about whether or not Russia actually does conduct hybrid warfare or not, and how to best define hybrid warfare. So usually, when we talk about hybrid warfare, we're talking about the combination of conventional and irregular warfare. So conventional warfare is something like you would see in Ukraine, where you have two militaries that are fighting over territory, right? And oftentimes the one with the most firepower wins. And in a regular warfare situation, it's in what we call an asymmetric environment, where one side is so strong that the other side cannot engage in a battle with them because they will lose. So instead, they conduct guerrilla warfare, terrorism, cybercrime, crime itself, those sorts of things. Now, a hybrid situation or a hybrid threat is when those two situations are combined together. So you can't easily put it into one class or the other. Um, so in the case of Russia, some people have argued that its initial attacks upon Ukraine before the invasion, before the full-scale invasion, constituted hybrid warfare because they were using insurgents in the Donbass. They were supporting the insurgents there, as well as when they invaded and annexed Crimea. They did not do it officially at first. They had the little green men, as were called, which was the Russian forces, but without insignia. Uh, so so some people have described that as hybrid, though I myself am a little skeptical about calling it hybrid warfare. But usually, when we talk about hybrid warfare these days, we are talking about Russia or China in many cases. Though again, I am skeptical about calling Chinese military operations hybrid. Um, Another fundamental and important example would be, say, certain criminal or terrorist groups throughout the world. And in many civil wars, such as Syria or in Myanmar, you see hybrid situations where some people are fighting conventionally, some people are fighting in a guerrilla situation, or they're doing both. So that's sort of the situation about the nature of hybrid warfare.
Do you mean uh, the conventional warfare plus irregular warfare? In
Yes.
because irregular warfare is so broad. You want to say all these non-state actor,
Mhm.
terrorists, or uh, any other group itself is irregular warfare. You can consider them as irregular warfare, or uh, you consider only the state army or state military is a conventional warfare. They are legitimate one. If they are not legitimate, those terrorists or non-state actor all are considered as irregular warfare. It is a bit confusing.
It is. It's a there are many different terminologies and you make a good point. Legitimacy and legal terms are oftentimes, thrown in the mix, so it's hard to say, when we say something like a non-state actor or a state actor, that doesn't tell you much other, right? It tells you something basic about it, but It doesn't tell you the complex political situation that's going on, which informs how they conduct warfare. So, and that's another problem with using words like irregular warfare or hybrid warfare. You get into the problem of oversimplifying complex situations. And that's part of the debate in hybrid warfare right now is has hybrid warfare gone too far in saying, oh, every time a state actor does something weird, every time they do something that's out of normal, that's hybrid. And then so it's kind of become a catch-all term for complex behavior, and that's problematic in the subject matter and in academia especially.
Cybercrime, can you say that is cyber warfare?
It can be considered hybrid warfare depending upon who you're asking. um, Many scholars do consider cyber warfare, information warfare, cybercrime to be aspects of hybrid warfare, especially when they're conducted by a state actor. Say, for example, China, Russia, North Korea. Um, these states, they are constantly doing cyber attacks. They do cyber theft a lot. North Korea is one of the world's leaders in cyber theft.
Right,
So when you're using something that is non-military, complex, hard to distinguish, and you're using it for state purposes, oftentimes that will get labeled hybrid because of the fact that it blurs the line between states of war and peace, that it blurs the line between conventional military operations and irregular operations or unconventional situations. Sometimes things such as financial or economic warfare can be labeled
right.
hybrid. Um, so there is a lot of
Scam,
merging of different terminologies that goes on in this.
like money scam
Hmm.
center. Like
Hmm. Scam centers,
like a
yes.
lot of Chinese, they do scam center at the border between Burmese China and
Hmm.
Burmese border in different places. Also, North Korea do scam
Hmm.
from within North Korea probably. But
Hmm.
Chinese, I also do they do in many countries, right? They used to do in Cambodia, even Philippines. Also within China, also there are many scam center
Hmm.
and at the Burmese Chinese border also. Uh, they are more free to do because nobody can control the border. So
Hmm.
that scam center are part of hybrid warfare.
Again, it really depends on who you ask. For me personally, there would have to be a military conflict involved for it to be labeled hybrid, um, because it's key in the name. I think if there isn't a war going on, then there you can't call it warfare. So, um, but again, you'll get different answers from different theorists about and different scholars and different practitioners as well about whether something like a scam center can be considered hybrid warfare, or maybe it can be considered a hybrid threat, which is more broad in its terminology because it doesn't have that sticking point of, oh, it must be during a military conflict. But in the situation of something like, for example, Myanmar, where China is very concerned with the state of the scanning enterprises that goes on in that geopolitical situation. So it directly gets involved with the military and geopolitical situation. So in there, you have more incentive to call it hybrid because it is directly influencing a military event, as opposed to, say, a normal situation where that's more of a police situation. But in the case of China, you've got more integration between the services as well. So the military is going to be interested in those situations, whether they're conducting it or trying to stop it, depending upon what they're interested for a particular region.
It is involved warfare with the scam center in Burmese border. Grand Buddhist Army, and also they chain border guards or something like that. The leader is such. And recently, U.S. government announced as they sanctioned him because of scan center.
Hmm.
Although they said they did not done it, but they just rent house or the land or something like that, and they try to say they are not involving the scam, but
Hmm.
that is under their control, and they are benefiting, and uh, many things related them, and they are also those Grand Buddhist Army, border guard army are very much involved in the warfare at the border area. They are fighting in many occasions with the different group, even within Karen, they are fighting. So that Karen Buddhist army and so-called border guard, they are proxy of military junta government.
Hmm.
So
And if, from my understanding, the border guard,
they
oh,
are
sorry, go ahead.
proxy army group. They are proxy militia of junta army. So
Hmm.
they engage in the fighting, and they also engage in the scam center. Maybe
Hmm.
they may deny in many things. How isn't that the hybrid warfare?
In that case, I would say yes, because of it directly contributes to the military situation.
Right,
So it's part of their military structure, their military campaign, their military
right.
strategy. And so, therefore, I would call it an aspect of hybrid warfare. And you made a good point about the border troops. They that fight for the junta. They started out as militias, if I'm not mistaken.
I mean,
And
Karen Buddhist army, they are not fighting against junta. They are used by junta.
yes,
The Korean Buddhist army is proxy militia. They are
and
fighting
that's
to other Korean army, other
yes.
Korean democracy fighter. So they
Hmm.
are inside Korean, and they were used by uh, military junta to let them fight themselves in among Korean people.
Hmm.
So they are proxy militia.
Yes. And so that use of proxy militias is a very important topic of discussion for hybrid warfare because similar strategies are used by, say, Iran, by Russia. And so gives the sense of distance to what you're doing. When your own troops are doing something, there's more repercussions politically, economically, diplomatically, that can come about as a result of that. So when you use a proxy and you have something that is more fluid in nature and highly tied to the region, such as a militia, it gives you more options to in terms of political maneuvering, military operations, um, so that you can have that more political stretch than having your own forces. And of course, it's also logistics because it's hard to put your troops into a faraway position to fight your enemies. So it's easier to have allies, in this case proxies, right, doing
Right,
the fighting on your behalf. And since the coup, I have been following it um, intensely.
right.
So I have some knowledge about that.
Yes, as we talk about the proxy military junta proxy army, that the Korean Buddhist army,
Mhm.
border guard army, similar to that, we have a proxy at the Chinese Burmese border. In that case, you may know the Wa or Maila Gogan. Uh, they are proxy of China.
Hmm.
They are not proxy of Burmese military junta. In that case, Wa Maila, uh, Kogan, they live in the Burmese territory, but they are proxy of Chinese. It's involved both Chinese government and or private businessmen because they both has influential on these proxy groups. And uh, in that case, Wa Maila and Gogan itself is Chinese, but they live in Burmese territory,
Mhm.
and they are they are let them Chinese proxy
Mhm.
to,
And
again
China,
Chinese people.
yeah,
But
and
that case
China has
also
also been a hybrid threat because it is available to them for military purposes if needed. Um, and they serve a very much a military purpose,
right.
but they aren't being unleashed against a particular state or non-state actor necessarily, if that makes sense. All right. They the main purpose, as far as I understand, the main concern of China um, in the region is basically stability, and uh, and of course to keep everybody on side with China, right? To recognize China as as their hegemon, so to speak, right? Or at least to not come out and say otherwise. um, so it's more of a economic and diplomatic tool that is in the pocket of the Chinese government, um, and which can be maneuvered and used however they see fit, maybe for military purposes, but mainly as it stands right now, um, it's a tool for securing most of their resources in Myanmar are geared towards um, securing its playing both because they were supporting the junta, but now they're playing both sides. And the main focus of that is to keep the stalemate going and also to protect their important gas lines, which go through the area. Because if there's ever say, for example, blockade as a result of Taiwan, that uh, important pipeline would be very critical to maintaining energy resources for China.
Gogan and people volunteer fighters. They already occupy Lashu district and many townships in Upper Burma. And I mean, they control because Gogan is a proxy of China. So Chinese order them withdraw back from the Lashu city.
Mhm.
Then how can you say China did not engage, even though they may not shoot a bullet or a gun by PL, People Liberation Army of China, but they order them to withdraw
Yeah,
back.
and that's not the end of it. And Chinese mercenaries are conducting operations in Myanmar as well.
Right.
Um, so I should distinguish, and again, this is the problem with this because it's such a complex issue that you can run into so many stopgaps like that. Um, and to problems. So there's a distinction, I would say, between a military conflict and violence. All right. So lots of times violence is conducted, but you're not necessarily at war. And again, it's also complex as well because what does it mean to be at war? Right? Is another question that's haunting theorists and practitioners today because in the West, we tend to have a very clear cut definition of, oh, we're at war, we're not at war, right? But something like China like Russia, they don't have those distinctions as much as the West does. Uh, in fact, some scholars believe that the Chinese believe that they're always at war, right? And that war encompasses everything, it's omnidimensional. So you get into the problem of myself being infused with Western values, um, trying to put my own definition of onto what may be different for different values from a policymaker or a theorist in China. Um, and so that's where you get into those problems because you make a great point, right? If violence is being conducted, if they can order a group to withdraw or to take a military objective or to do anything in relation to their military operations, is that not military conflict? And that becomes a serious issue. And that's one that I feel that needs to continue sparking debate um, because it's a matter of life or death. If we treat every Chinese action of violence, proxy or otherwise, as an act of war, well, then it goes down a slippery slope really fast, doesn't it?
Right, right. So it's clear China breach Burmese sovereignty, Burmese security, and the apart from the proxy issue, Myanmar proxy, Bogan proxy, what proxy issue, Chinese security personnel are inside Burmese at the non-conflict zone or at the seaport, Jiaoqiu seaport, they are a Chinese security personnel. Because Burmese constitution cannot let them allow any security personnel or insecurity personnel inside Burma. So that is a Burmese uh, security breach by China because
Mm-hmm.
China contact point is the military junta, but
Mm-hmm.
military junta has no legitimate,
Mm-hmm.
so junta can do whatever they want. Yeah, even though we told Chinese government whatever you are doing business or anything with the military junta will be illegal. It
Mm-hmm.
will be illegal. So which means China should refrain from anything business or engaging with military junta. So if they engage with the military, in, like the military security issue, uh, then China is intentionally interfering into Burma. And China, whatever China lost in terms of gas pipeline or any business loss, that we Burmese people are not responsible. I
Mm-hmm.
wrote once to Chinese government, whatever you lost or you uh, caused by those business engagement with military regime, that will not be responsibility of Burmese people. So China should know they have to refrain from that. If they do and they lost, they cannot blame Burma because they intentionally engaging with the military junta. So
Yeah, so they're interfering in the internal aspects of Burma, and in the same sense that they do with many other countries. The
yes,
Chinese election interference in both Canada and the United States goes back many years, and it is extensive. I can't get into the full details, and it's also not my area of expertise, but we do know that election interference, in the same sense with Russia, is part of how they conduct state affairs. It's it's very common for both those countries and their governments. And also there have been accusations uh, of their own of them policing their own Chinese uh, re refugees or students or of the like who come to Canada uh, and uh, and that they're being harassed or threatened in many ways by Chinese officials. So essentially, them trying to do international policing and sidestep the sovereignty of the laws of a place like Canada. And of course, this is a very serious issue.
Right.
Just because it's normal, historical behavior doesn't mean that it's right. And of course, every country should take its sovereignty very seriously. Um, and so Canada, these are threats that Canada really needs to address and to address aggressively, in my opinion. Um, Otherwise, China is going to keep doing it.
Apart from election, just that as you said, the overseas police, that harassing and
Mhm.
making a kind of threat, or I don't know, physically anything they violated in Canada is an Canada security breach, because you have Canadian police, so
Mhm.
beside police or beyond Canadian police, Chinese policies, they went there and they are doing somebody who are resident and under Canada authority, which means they are showing Chinese authority in
Mhm.
Canada territory. So I talked last time also, Australian professor, there were many overseas Chinese police in Australia. Even they have Chinese overseas police office unofficially. There
Mhm.
was there. So Australia was a lot about those Chinese interference for
It
Canadian
is a
security.
serious threat to Canadian national security and to any country's national security, whether it be Australia or any other, or the United States, wherever, because national security involves the ability to have sovereignty. And part of sovereignty is that your laws apply to your country and only your laws, right? Except for, of course, things like the UN, international treaties and such, right? Um, and and so I do think that is a threat to the authority and legitimacy of local governments when China or some other rogue actor does such a thing.
Definitely. Even Chinese descendant in Canada, it doesn't matter. Whoever live in Canada is under Canada authority. You cannot say because of my family, my relative in Canada, so I am still I have authority over my family here, or my brother here, my sister. It is under Canada authority, right?
It can't be accepted internationally. The foundation of international society is the concept of sovereignty. And the part of the main aspects of diplomatic movements to and fro are the idea that if you violate sovereignty, you'll be punished, whether by a a hegemon of a region or whether it's the international community itself. And so definitely uh, situations like this require attention.
Or who are Chinese descendant, which means a kind of Chinese government, they have to be subject to the Chinese government.
Mhm.
How do you see?
Uh, as long as you're in Canada, you are, as far as I understand, you are subject to Canadian laws and not to the laws of other countries. And if again it comes back to sovereignty, if that were to be violated, then laws would essentially become defunct, and it would be, and and that's part of again coming back to China. When we talk about Chinese military and political thinking, we often talk about the three warfares.
Even though the crown is head of state, British descendant or British immigrant who become Canadian citizen and who live, even visitor, British visitor in Canada, during their stay in Canada, they have to abide by Canadian law and law enforcement under Canadian authority.
Yes.
As you said, the British government has nothing to be subjected any British visitor to Canada or British descendant or British uh, who are immigrated to Canada. But even British can't do in Canada. Why China is, in case if they compare with British at least you have crown as head of state. But China is no head of state or nothing related to Canada. Why China try to apply subject to all these Chinese descendant, Chinese immigrant, Chinese even visitor,
Mhm.
and whoever. So
That's a great question.
that you said it should be according to Canadian authority, not being
Yes.
China. But that is violation, right?
Why China does that is a great question. And as I was saying earlier, it has to do with the three warfares that China believes in. So one of those is legal warfare, the idea that they can manipulate international law, local law, national laws to serve their own strategic ends, whether in terms of manipulating those laws or interfering in them or just straight up violate or just violating them. Because countries like Canada are very concerned with the international order and the legal international order. China is not, because China does not recognize the current legal order. They want the legal order to be their order, not that of what is perceived to be that of the United States. So something that is, for example, laws related to sovereignty, they don't believe that those laws are completely binding to them. Chinese people are Chinese, according to them, and therefore they have the power as a legitimate authority over China and the world, in their opinion, to exercise that authority wherever people are. And so, obviously, again, that comes down to different fundamental values that I've talked about before, between China and the West. And when I say China, I mean the Chinese policymakers. Um, and so why? And then also, it's of course, basic strategic aspects of international politics. China wants to prove that it's powerful. And so, an easy way to prove that it's powerful is that to say we can do whatever we want wherever we are. It doesn't matter if you live in a different country, even if that country is on the other side of the world, we will get to you, right? And we will show our authority. So that is a way of telling not only the world, but its own people that it has world stretching authority. Because again, China is trying to compete with the United States to be the number one power in the world. And in order to do that, they have to compete with the perceived United States ability to implement authority anywhere in the world. Power projection, what we call power projection, is very important to great powers. The ability to exercise authority in distant lands, to say that nothing is
Uh,
beyond reproach. These are forms of power projection. Um, and again, it serves a dual purpose. It's a signal to the world and to the local government that they can do what they want, and it's a signal to the local population that they can't escape. That wherever they go, they will be under the authority of the party.
what will be consequence of Chinese behavior?
In the U.S., the biggest case of power projection has been actually mostly indirect. And so the idea that China could promote the idea of economic tangibility between the two places. So since the 1990s, much investment has been put into China, and that was uh, a deliberate strategy from Chinese leadership, whether it be political leadership or business leadership, um, to create this sort of economic ties with the United States, partly for purely economic reasons, but also partly for strategic reasons. Um, in that, when two countries are economically tied together, it becomes easier to influence their decision making, because when one person is harmed, the other person is harmed economically. So China very much uses its economic influence with the United States. Of course, it's not the only way they do it, um, but I would say, as it stands, it's the most important nature of power projection in relation to the United States. Of course, the other way, and in terms of the United States directly, but then indirectly in terms of allies, China, pushes back against U.S. interests throughout the globe. Of course, the most prominent being the tensions over Taiwan, um, and where that will go in the future.
You said in order to do coverage, China do economic ties strongly with US. So it seems Chinese effort is not much aware by US and many those leadership, or they can
I would say it's
they can
increasingly
use
becoming aware by the United States. The United States I would say at first, it was definitely not aware, but now the United States is aware. And in my opinion, they have, under the two Trump administrations, very much exaggerated the importance and um, the bad intentions of these economic relations. Everything in so many conservative pundits in the United States, um, and people connected to the Trump administration, or conservative military theorists, political theorists, China experts, they will say that, oh, that the whole economic connection between the two countries serves the purpose of manipulating the United States, which I think is an exaggeration. But to deny the existence of malintent would be ridiculous in my in my opinion. So you kind of have to take a middle road. You can't say every deal with China is bad, and then at the same time you can't say that being so entwined with a authoritarian regime that wants to supersede the United States, it's going to be all friendships and hugs. That's not going to be the case.
I don't know, US can give up, or US can disband Chinese uh, this kind of economic tie, or they want to reduce economic tie with.
I'm not an
China,
economist, but I think that the Trump administration's attempts to distance their ties to China, have not been very effective and have been detrimental to U.S. trade and the U.S. economy, in my opinion. I think that uh, the situation is too far gone for even the most radical of protectionism is going to it's only going to hurt both sides, and it's not going to change the fact that these two countries are so deeply intertwined. And who knows, maybe the economic connections between the two is ultimately a good thing. Like I said, there are good and bad aspects to the whole situation. And only time will tell if it ultimately was positive for the United States or negative for the United States. Um,
so not now, not yet
no,
now.
no, not now because China recently passed the United States as the supposed number one economy, largest economy in the world. Um, but that really is a misnomer because, um, to my understanding, um, China has a much larger population, has much larger population than the United States. So, for example, if China has, I don't know if it's three times their population, more than three times their population, right? That means that if they're about equal in terms of total economic wealth, that means that the average Chinese is one third as wealthy as the average American. So and is total economic wealth more important, or for example, purchasing power parity of the individual? That's again a question for an economist, not for me. But I think that there's a lot of I think that in the immediate future, uh, China has to be careful about contesting the United States because they're not there in terms of superseding the United States economically. And again, like I said, they're so intertwined that any massive economic move against the United States is going to be detrimental to China.
But China coverage with the economy and the other side, U.S., as you said, will not immediately or near future, they or even now they cannot able to distance with Chinese economy. Uh, I guess eventually it will be happen, isn't
And that's the nature of a globalized economic order as well, is that a state has to realize that other states and non-state actors as well are going to have some aspect of power projection within their own country because of how economically intertwined the entire world is. So unless you want to be totally closed off from the world, you can't avoid some aspects of power and influence seeping into your own country from outside. The question is then becomes about limiting them, right? And making sure that your power is more important, more is greater than their power. But you cannot exercise their power completely. That's impossible because economics is power. Uh, and as long as there is some economic foothold within a country, someone's going to hold that power. Great sense of optimism in after the end of the Cold War that liberal democracy was not only a good thing, that it was natural, inevitable, right? Because the West saw their victory against the Soviet Union as embarking upon a new era, right? And so this was applied to China. They would say China is eventually going to stop being authoritarian, and when it does, we can make lots of money. and also we can have them as an ally. So we need to pour more resources, more investment, more good ties into China, more economic um, alignment between the two countries. But it was in my opinion, a fundamental misunderstanding of the Chinese political system and tradition. And it was an optimistic uh, arrogance, essentially, from that the Western order was inevitable. It wasn't something that had to be won, right, through hard means. It was something that would just happen. And that was a serious mistake.
Right. Well, I guess the West, they should also balance economic balance to the other democratic countries, you know,
Mm-hmm.
uh,
Mm-hmm.
maybe in the
Um,
region, democratic country in the region, in the Pacific, Asia Pacific region, or who are
mhm,
more aligned with the democracy, but the West, they are poor calculation probably. They or ignores a lot of democracy country economic and power was absent. Uh, they did over economic and power to the communist China. That is become a threat to the West nowadays. Danger for themselves. The
mhm.
West, they should also balance and support democracy country. You know, 2 decades ago, I guess.
Yes, part of the problem was after the end of the Cold War and during the 1990s, um, the United States, not that it did, go throughout the world and conduct aid and military operations, peacekeeping operations, non-military support for many countries throughout the world. But I would say generally they were looking internally. We've won the Cold War and everybody will become a democracy. So now let's worry about us, right? And so, giving at the moment where the United States should have been more on its toes about the next problems that it's faced, about helping to shape the world, um, not being the world's policeman necessarily, because that's going too far, but helping to shape the strategic environment. They were essentially pulling back, which is very much the American tradition. We see it happening today with the Trump administration returning to isolationism. So the United States tends oftentimes to go back and forth, to swing a pendulum between being highly international and highly domestic. And so the strategic choice to essentially let the world develop as it was, in my opinion, a serious miscalculation. And you can see it in the economics as well. The There was an assumption that simply uh, giving large loans to countries through the World Bank, through the IMF, and um, opening up markets and having a financial deregulation, all these sorts of things would spur economies and promote democracy. But it resulted in uh, corruption, misallocation of resources. First the Asian bubble collapsed, and then later you had the dot-com crisis. And I think this sort of international movement towards mass deregulation really climaxed in 2008 crisis, which became a global crisis as well. But in the 1990s, Asia was especially suffering from these economic problems, um, largely having to do with the wild abandon that the United States took towards economic policies and the assumption that uh, free markets would solve any problem, which was a serious problem, and it had cultural ramifications as well because it pushed countries like Russia uh, away from their emerging uh, liberal capitalist democratic tendencies because it said to them, this doesn't work. We can't go back to the Soviet Union, but we can't become the West, right? We have to find something different. And and same thing with China as well. They realized that they couldn't go back to the Maoist ways, but at the same time, they didn't want to give up their Maoist political tradition. Um, and at the same time, they didn't fully believe in economic neoliberalism. And so you get a mixed economy, which is the result today.
I think you cannot just go along military. You have to go along military and economic together, right? To
Yes.
to
Um,
to to deal
it's
that.
like I said earlier, you have to understand the way China thinks about things. They don't they don't silo things into different separate areas the way that we tend to in the West. And they view um, warfare and political warfare together. In fact, there is in an important document from 1999 called Unrestricted Warfare, which was very influential in the PLA, also influential in the United States, but especially important in the development of the modern PLA. Um, and it said that warfare and military geopolitical thinking have become omnidimensional, is the term that they use. The idea that all components of life fit into conflict. Everything is about conflict, and every aspect of conflict is important to the regime. And any situation that involves conflict of some kind needs to warp all of these concepts together into a unitary whole. So you find a way not just to include all the things in the way that we do with the West. We have this term called whole of government, which is the idea that um, you include in your analysis, your strategic analysis, all aspects of the government. But in China, it's not enough to simply include them. You have to mold them into a united whole. They're together, they're not many, they are one. And this is very important for understanding how China conducts itself in the world and at home as well.
The US space and the West space technology, space technology can rule the sky over China, or China is also going better than before. So how is the US position in space technology?
That's a great question because I've also studied extensively space warfare. Um, and it's one of my favorite areas to study. Yes, the United States has more technological capability than China. It has more network capability, more information technology. But the problem is that because of this, the United States is far more reliant on these technologies than China. So if the United States loses these capabilities, it will be crippled. If China loses these capabilities, it will not be crippled. So if you look at, for example, a satellite war, so in the case of a full on war between China and the United States, one of the first things China would do is attack American satellites. And this would severely cripple American capabilities. Um, Something around a quarter of NATO military forces rely directly upon satellites in order to conduct operations. So you knock out most satellites, there you go. One quarter of NATO forces are suddenly in serious trouble. where that reliance is not so much of the case in China. And in terms of ruling the skies or ruling space, we're not at that point in terms of space capability. We're more in terms of looking at satellite warfare, controlling GPS capability. Um, and so uh, the United States doesn't really have the ability to dominate the skies over mainland China. It could theoretically do that, especially in a nuclear situation, but hopefully never get into that scenario. Um, but in terms of a conventional military situation, first of all, I doubt that China would ever want to be in that situation because it doesn't have the logistical capability outside of its nuclear warheads to strike at the United States in any significant way, where the United States does in the case of China. So the likelihood is that it will not escalate to that point. But China has a robust cyber capability for targeting satellites. It also has what we call kamikaze satellites, which is simply a smaller satellite, which you which it's circling around all the time, and all it needs to do is slightly change direction, and it slams into another satellite, destroys that satellite.
Okay.
Or you can push the satellite out of the way, and now you have your own satellite in that bandwidth. So you've essentially replaced that satellite with your own. Um, so
You
the
know,
China has a very serious capability in this regard. I would say next to the United States, they have um, the most robust space capability.
like recently I saw the U.S. Defense Secretary has evolved to improve space technology.
Mhm,
So
mhm,
he tried to to rule the sky. You know,
mhm.
they have
It's
ambition to rule the sky. So I
Yep.
think they are trying, I guess.
Oh, they're absolutely trying. You can be sure that DARPA right now, who is in charge of developing special new technologies for the United States military, is developing specialized space capability right now, um, and they are looking way into the future. Uh, and right now, what's become very important in the discussions of military theory and military practice in the United States are concepts like mosaic warfare and concepts like multi-domain operations, which emphasize the ability of technology allowing different aspects of the whole environment of the world to be open to military capabilities, including space. So, in multi domain operations, the United States wishes to be superior in every single domain, whether it be land, air, sea, amphibious, whatever, cyber. And so they want to fill that gap with with space as well. Otherwise, you can't have what is called full spectrum dominance or domain dominance with one domain lacking. So they want to fill that domain as fast as possible. But it's going to take a lot of time, and it's hard to gauge how much time that would take or if they'll even get there. As it stands right now, I don't. I think that China could pose a serious threat to American space capabilities, but we'll see where that goes in the future.
Right, right. It seems now U.S. Defense Department is a lot of changes and there are a lot of their renovation and they have a lot of new policy, I guess, new strategy probably, and that's I mean current defense strategy probably, and it's important as you find out one thing is cyber crime and
Mhm.
scam center. Those are although it seem look like nothing, but it's very serious, right?
Oh yeah,
Very, very dangerous thing. So I think
millions and millions of dollars
right that
siphoned away for stolen from people.
right it should be
Um,
clear, that U.S. government, Defense Department, even Defense Department has to do. They have reason to deal with those scam center, and cyber crime issue, because that's part of security issue and military issue as well. Aspect ASEAN countries, I think, crucial for this U.S. strategy. And U.S. has aligned with Japan, Australia in the region. And next, if U.S. has completely able to uh, uh, bring ASEAN groups, then I think U.S. can maintain and prevent very well about China. And, and
Japan, you mentioned, is very.
first, I think the scam center issue, the cyber crime issue, I think that should be eliminated like at the Burmese border and at the Chinese Burmese border, all those things. I think US should not wait time. I think this is time to deal and, you know, and democracy, supporting democracy group, We are now in the Burmese crisis, battle between the democracy fighter and authoritarian military junta. Between this group, China is in the military junta group, and democracy fighter has no support. EU, American, they are not really supporting. They are neutral. They are neutral. So now this time they have to stand up boldly to support and to clean all this cyber crime and the scam center, all this drug issue together with democracy fighter and also remove the military junta. Because in ASEAN region, the main problem is now Burmese issue. So that is a good strategy. That is urgent thing. How do you see that?
Um, I think that the United States.
Canada role is also important.
Mhm. I would like to see the West, not just the United States, but the West, indeed support these such groups uh, who are fighting authoritarian regimes. But at the same time, I would emphasize caution in getting too ideologically motivated in determining foreign policy because foreign policy should mainly be about the security and interests of your country. And so sometimes that means making hard choices.
I'm just not pointing about ideology now.
But you don't
Burma,
want what's called
Burmese, Burmese
overreach.
military is now a kind of proxy of China.
Hmm.
So China used to do proxy of the smaller group, Gogan, Minor, and Wa at the border. But now China's trying to do bigger proxy. That is a Burmese military junta. The junta will be bigger proxy that can be obstacle for ASEAN region, ASEAN countries. So that's why that we have to deal first those proxy. And if you can clean in Burma, including those scam and all this cyber crime, that is not at all about ideology. Now it's about military issue.
I definitely agree with you.
So part
I
of
agree with you.
that strategy, democracy fighter, if we can win in Burma, then we can also, win in ASEAN. Then if
Hmm.
we win ASEAN and the region, already Japan and Australia are part of a US alliance. So they have to stop talking about ideology. It's no more about ideology. It's about the military issue. Ideology can be part of them, but now the main issue is that military issue. It's
Yes,
directly.
I think that's a fantastic point. I 100% agree with you that um, it is a geopolitical military issue that is of serious consequence. So definitely attention needs to be brought to it. Of course, caution as well, strategic caution. It would definitely deal a blow to Chinese influence throughout the region.
because Burmese issue involve cyber cybercrime,
Hmm.
scam, and drug, and geopolitics. Definitely, as you pointed out, and the competition, and there is very high chance for democracy forces. In Burma, the military junta uh, mainly control the country. It's less than 50% territory. Most territory are not controlled by military junta. If the West and democracy country fully spotted, it's definitely we can win it. Which means we can win ASEAN region, and also the US can easily defeat China. So that is a military issue, geopolitical military issue. Put aside about ideology. That military issue is fast. In my opinion, it's 90% chances.
I think that the military situation definitely is favorable to the rebels right now. Um, it's the military junta has not been running the war well, to
No,
say not well at all. Um, one of the things in military history we know for sure is that terror bombing does not work. Um, Bombing civilians indiscriminately and causing using scorched earth tactics to create millions of refugees is not a good idea. That these things only make your people hate you more, and create more enemies for you. Uh, but what is going to need to happen for the rebels is much more unity within the different forces, um, and a with Operation. You saw the potential with Operation 1027 for their capabilities and how fragile the hold on the minds of the junta soldiers is. Uh, but uh, subsequent offensives were done piecemeal in response to the initial success of that first operation by the Brotherhood. And so, what needs to happen is a much more coordinated offensive, in my opinion, um, because you're only going to get piecemeal results when you do piecemeal offensives. And we've seen that happen in Ukraine, where, coming back to what we were talking about, looking at the military situation as a whole, you can't sort of narrow in, focus on one particular thing and expect to get big results in it out of it. You're going to get the results that are tied to that specific location. All right, you have to think bigger,
right.
and that involves um, more sophisticated weapons that the rebels are going to need, better training, um, and uh, an air force would help. But those things are hard to get, hard to get. They cost a lot of money and a lot of training, um, and a more robust armor capability would be extremely helpful for the rebels as well, because the military junta has an advantage as it stands in terms of things like tanks, APCs, those sorts of things. Those things are crucial to the modern battlefield. But one thing that has been going well for the rebels lately is their use of drones. And drones are becoming increasingly important in today's military conflicts, as we've seen from uh, uh, the Armenia-Azerbaijan war, and of course recently with Ukraine. Um, I think that drones are, if not as important as tanks, they're getting there. And so the if the rebels were very smart, they would start bringing in a lot of these and developing a lot of these drone capabilities to offset the material advantage that the junta has, especially since the junta controls most of the large urban factories, and so it can at least theoretically outproduce the rebels. So you can offset that by having cheap materials like kamikaze drones and recon drones, which is one of the ways Ukraine has been offsetting the industrial superiority of Russia. Of course, with the help of massive aid from the West as well.
As you mentioned about unity among opposition and democracy groups, and uh, I mean that's not a big deal. We can solve it. It is not issue. The main it's example uh, if U.S. government and if the White House, if Trump invited me, I need those who are in power is done. Then next strategy is, as you point out, is true. A good weapon and a good military support back up the Air Force or drone, and then you can easily finish, you know. If
Mhm.
a drone strike the headquarter military regime, military groups, elites, if uh, the main elites are gone, even all these military junta army will be automatically collapse. So then we can organize the country and we can make a good country. We can build it. So that is a possible way in Burmese scale social media at the think tank groups among Burmese democracy activists or scholar or any expertise. People can see who are produce a lot of intellectual knowledges. David can kill Goliath because he has a good backup. God has appointed David, you know.
Hmm.
God appointed David. Then David can kill Goliath. So that exactly it can happen in Burma. The White House president at least. Then all this the Western can be also unite, and our opposition democracy can also unite. You know, then we can make a plan. I mean,
Mhm.
Burmese case is much easier than Ukraine case. Ukraine
Mhm.
case you cannot solve overnight. Burmese case you can solve it overnight, and that's mean uh, solving Burmese case mean you are gaining ASEAN, the region. ASEAN
Mhm.
gaining mean US is able to deal easily of China. These are military issue. Now we are talking really military issue, geopolitical military issue.
Mhm.
Ideology will be follow up.
Cool.
So I think Canada government should also support, I guess, because Burmese case that include many issue, you know, that you
Mhm.
pointed out also.
It is a complex environment and a complex issue. I would like to see hybrid warfare enter much more of the discussion when we have talks about whenever we talk about complex issues. I would like hybrid warfare to be mentioned in some regard, even if it's just to say that it's not a case. I think that it needs to enter the popular lexicon. It needs to come out of academia, but at the same time, um, I want people to be careful about labeling everything that's complex hybrid warfare because that's simply not the case, as I've explained before. Um, and we talked about before it's important to have values and to project your values, but at the same time to not to confuse your values for or with those of others, and so that you can get into the head of of someone else. In the case of, say, Russia, China, or other actors. Um, and at the same time, understanding that because it's the case for China, when we view complex issues throughout the world, we should look at it as a whole. Look at how every dimension affects it. Don't just look at it in terms of ideology. Don't just look at it in terms of the military. Don't just look in terms of the political or the economic. You have to look at it all together.
Right.
And that's how you can provide a proper analysis.
Okay, thank you, Andres, for today.
Thank you so much for having me.